In the last few years, it's been, believe it or not, difficult to find too much to be super happy about. But today, I have a certified treat to share with you all. It involves everyone's three favorite things: executives crying, Jeff Bezos mauling, and working people winning for once in their life. That's right, folks. For the first time in the American history of Amazon, workers finally fought through all the BS of trying to form a union in this country and won. So yeah, as of last week, workers at a Staten Island Amazon facility voted in a decently wide margin to support the formation of an Amazon labor union. Now, it's important to note up front, unfortunately, none of this is a conclusive victory. Amazon still has a chance to contest the results, and the NLRB could easily, mess with things as they've done for an unfortunate few decades here. And it's also possible that contract negotiations go awry. But this is nonetheless a watershed moment in American labor history. For a company that has for so long resisted, those dirty peasants impacting Jeff Bezos' grand genius plan for an everything store, it's great to see it finally happen, even with all of the barriers in their way. So as much as I just want to take a moment here and let myself, just for once, enjoy good news, I also think it's important for us to learn from the victories of this union effort to apply it to other efforts. It's almost like that's how you build a movement. So let's start with the basics. As of Friday, the Fulfillment Center on Staten Island voted with a 500 vote margin in favor of the world's first Amazon labor union. Their main push for coworkers was bargaining for a $30 minimum wage, better working conditions, and paid breaks, along with transparent promotion policies. For anyone who's unaware, Amazon has a really bad history with breaks, having, bathrooms all the way across the facility to the point where your 15 minutes off is mostly spent just walking to the bathroom. So these are some pretty bare minimum basic asks. But of course, plenty of union efforts in American history have asked for less and have been less successful. So it's important to ask, what exactly happened here? Why were they victorious when others failed? Especially considering that at the same time this Amazon facility was voting on a union, another one in Bessemer, Alabama was, which, while that's still a contested election, looks like it's leaning toward no. So it's important for us to ask, why did this one succeed while this one failed? Is that due to some unique strength in the Staten Island effort, or is it the result of failures on Amazon's part in this specific case? Let's start by exploring Amazon's failures, and this could be its own video. There are a lot of them. Amazon had police arrest Chris Smalls and other organizers, Chris Smalls being a person we'll talk much more about in a minute, for going onto Amazon property to deliver food to workers, which is just such a heartless, inhuman act that it's hard to not have that spur support for the union. On top of that, they tried to roll out the old school, union might mean you actually lose money argument. But with unemployment low and wages rising, it's really hard for that argument to land. And it seems, hearing from people on the ground, that this message did not go over well. And it added in Chris Smalls and the organizers feeling like a very hopeful force. It also really doesn't help that they fired one of the organizers for violating social distancing rules, even though he was leading a protest to force Amazon to take workers' protection more seriously, which is just such a blatant contradiction on its face. It gave him huge credit and made them look, hypocritical and, scummy as they rightly are. Also, and this may end up being one of the more damning mistakes of Amazon's campaign, at a meeting with senior executives, they called for an attempt to smear Chris Smalls by calling him not smart or articulate, which, on top of just being generally disrespectful to any person, had a specific racist coding to it, considering Chris Smalls is black and talks with, a little bit of AAVE, which, believe it or not, helped garner support behind the union in the people of color working at the facility. And along that line, there were times that anti-union consultants or people within the company called the organizers thugs, which also just kind of has a racially coded connotation that rubs people the wrong way. Now, all of these are pretty egregious miscalculations from Amazon. Like, maybe if you're trying to appeal to people of color in your facility, don't use such racially charged language. I feel like that's a pretty easy step one. But while a few of these failures reflect things specific to this union effort, a number of these points are more general. Like in this moment of wages rising and people generally valuing their labor a bit more, that impacts a union effort regardless of where it's taking place or the specific people involved. So we have to ask, if it's harder nowadays for Amazon to fearmonger about unions leading to less wages during a period of high labor demand, why didn't that argument fall flat with Bessemer's union? Or to put it another way, why is it that this union was so uniquely successful? One possible explanation is that having a guy like Chris Smalls kind of center himself in the union effort may have been a benefit, and I don't want to, great man theory of history the union drive here, as he himself would give credit to the dozens of organizers who phone banked and talked to coworkers for years at this point, but I do want to give the team credit for being pretty media savvy. First off, their team seemed to be pretty tapped into new media, like reaching out to folks on TikTok and social media accounts like that to try to gain support. And on top of that, Chris Smalls was pretty quick to hop onto alternative media circuits. Like I remember 2 years ago now hearing him on like Secular Talk or Rising and stuff like that, sharing his story. And I do think him stepping out to make himself sort of a central figure as somebody so wronged by the company did garner support. Because having a guy like Chris Smalls, who is, if you hear him talk, really down to earth, and having him be sort of the face of your movement while being able to put his heartbreaking story on the front line, that he was fired for requesting safety measures, making that your central narrative really makes it easier to break through some traditional anti-union fear-mongering. Now, part of Chris Smalls being the center of this movement was Amazon's own doing. Like I said, leaked documents show they wanted to make him the face of it because they thought he was inarticulate. So, the miscalculation of the year there. But I still think he deserves credit for putting himself and his story out there and for sort of leaning into these narratives to garner support both locally and nationally. And moreover, I think his specific circumstances helped the union pitch itself as an overall force for good. Like, what a genius selling point it is to have the guy trying to be president of this union be the one who was fired for trying to help people. Like, he was so committed to improving the livelihoods of his coworkers that he followed that to the bitter end. He himself and all the other people driving this unionization effort were in the trenches with everybody. They knew what it was like to go through those early stages of the pandemic when they were being forced with minimal safety measures to, shove boxes around. Which brings us to one other possible reason that this unionist drive was so successful, and that is decentralization. Other union attempts at Amazon facilities have been through pre-established national unions, like the one in Bessemer, Alabama, has been trying to go through RWDSU. And that makes conventional sense, a national union has people on payroll to fight these drives for them. They have access to funds to provide support for these drives. But is it possible that a big national union gives too much credence to shitty anti-union arguments that they're a corrupt bureaucracy? If you have somebody come in from out of state who's maybe never worked in the type of facility that you've worked in, is it possible you're actually playing into Amazon's hands? As I'm sure they would love to convince people that you're just some outsider trying to stir things up. I don't think there will ever be one conclusive answer, as each case is different, but it does seem pretty clear to me that the Staten Island effort was aided by being a totally new union. So in this specific case, I think creating a new union was actually the perfect choice for this weird perfect storm of an organizing opportunity. This union was entirely led by current and former employees, and those former employees were, again, only fired because they were just trying to help too much. And the fact that they're making this union from the ground up, that it is so localized to this facility, makes it really hard to argue that there's some outsider force for evil. Like, these are your coworkers, the people who send you birthday presents or maybe watch your kids every other weekend. It's hard to sell people on the idea that this movement is some sort of greedy or lecherous group of, as they would put it, thugs. So while I obviously don't think we should totally abandon national unions, as there is certainly power in having groups connected and talking to each other, and it, makes larger strikes much easier, but I do think it's worth considering ways to localize unions and union efforts so that the organization can feel like a part of the community and the folks involved at the warehouse or whatever can feel the model better represents them. And going back a little bit to wider conversations about narrative building, I think it's really important to look at how this effort built a narrative. You'll see, like MSNBC headlines calling this David versus Goliath. And that is genius marketing right there. Can somebody write that down? Like, we're starting to find ourselves in this moment of broader distrust of these big companies. So leaning into that is absolutely in your best interest. And on top of that, it seems this union spent a lot of time trying to make the union sound like a hopeful force for good, not just like a thing that we should begrudgingly kind of have because, yeah, it's better than nothing, but like making it sound like this good, positive, fun, like expansion of democracy. That's really important to focus in on. Now, of course, after this one tentative victory on Staten Island, it's important to ask, how might Amazon respond in the future? Well, perfectly in line with the rest of anti-union history in America. As if Amazon wasn't already on this path, it seems they plan on going even more authoritarian. A series of documents leaked to The Intercept show that Amazon is planning on banning a bunch of phrases on the apps that their employees use to communicate. Now, you might think this is a fairly normal TOS sort of thing. You want to make sure that it is clearly established, racial slurs or being sexist aren't allowed on your app. So what are the words they're proposing banning exactly? Oh, it's some pretty egregious, hateful stuff, like they don't want people using the word raises or unfair or union, and oh my God, most hateful and despicable of all, they don't want you to use the word restroom, because God forbid your employees talk about the fact that it's hard to pee at your place of employment. Now, hopefully there's enough backlash to this proposal that none of these words get banned. And even if they do get banned on these apps, that doesn't stop coworkers from being disgruntled and discussing their grievances. But it's very telling that in the immediate response to their first union loss, and by that I mean that Amazon, took the L for once, and they will probably have a union at their facility, it's very telling that the higher ups immediately want to just cut off the ability for their workers to discuss grievances. Like, I cannot believe that bathroom breaks are going to be a banned topic on these apps. They're so desperate to stop their employees from having even the slightest say in Jeff Bezos' genius, godlike plan for a store that they're just gonna ban regular words. But, in a sense, you kinda love to see it, because that is a pretty clear sign that Bezos is squirming somewhere. And I simply have to just take a moment to enjoy that thought. Mwah. Now, lastly, I want to talk about a frustrating and depressing mixed bag part of all this, and that was this effort's lack of support from politicians. While AOC has been a thorn in Amazon's side for years in the city, and she's been a part of other union drives in the past, she was absent from this union election for some reason. She claims that a combination of security issues and scheduling conflicts led to her not showing up to support this effort. And I do want to be sympathetic to the fact that, you know, being painted as the national face of Maoist Venezuela, no iPhone, communist, Maoist socialism probably puts a target on your back that leads to some weirdos trying to unalive you. But where I can't let her get off the hook here is the fact that for several days prior to this, she was holding in-person events, and she had like her first town hall since the start, in person that is, since the start of the pandemic. So like, she's been out and about in person at outdoor events, and she couldn't even show up to this one, let alone at the very least, she could have just tweeted about this. She could have been on some sort of news network talking about this. Her failure to do even the barest of minimum to show support with her platform for this effort is, to me at least, and this is obviously speaking as somebody outside of the union effort, that's almost more upsetting to me than that she had some sort of scheduling or security concern. And I'm not necessarily trying to hyperfixate on her here, as, you know, plenty of other politicians didn't show up or voice support, and news outlets in general do a bad job of rallying support behind these efforts. Like, I didn't even know there was an election in Staten Island until I heard news stories that it was victorious. So I do think we need to ask more of our politicians and, you know, media institutions to focus on this sort of thing. But at the same time, I think it's pretty inspiring that this union effort was able to succeed without that institutional support. Like, in contrast, right-wing movements have to be incredibly astroturfed to have any chance of making an impact. But whereas in our case, it's rad to see that this union drive was able to thrive, even without support from national politicians or media figures. That's inspiring. Now, that's not something we should rely on, and we should take this victory as sort of, you know, an outlier to push politicians to be, you know, better representatives and to push media outlets to better cover these stories. I'm just saying it is at the same time that it is frustrating that there was a lack of support, it is inspiring that they were able to succeed in spite of all of it. And on that point, you know, in general, it's inspiring whenever you see a union forming these days, as there's so much stacked against them, you know, so many laws that favor the company, like the fact that they can have signs posted everywhere suggesting they vote no, the fact that Amazon can hold all these required meetings where they sit there and just have 30 minutes of your required time to share their propaganda, like all that is stacked against every union that tries to form. So really, any success is a big deal these days, and it really we should take a moment to highlight it. So overall, those are my thoughts at the moment. I'm certainly going to spend a lot of my time in the coming months thinking through and listening to the successes of this movement, and I suggest we all do the same, you know. I hope we all spend the coming months pining over every word that all of these organizers have to say, as clearly there is a lot to be learned from this case study. And I have a feeling their success in Staten Island will prove to be a helpful blueprint across the country for the working class to, for the first time in a while, have something resembling a say in this country. Anyways, folks, thank you for watching. That'll be it for this video. Now, let me turn it on over to the pre-recorded outro. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to toss me a like and subscribe down below. But if you really want to help me out, you can join me over on Patreon. Patrons get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, like early versions of every video, and exclusive Patreon-only videos. Plus, if you join the Piley Benton's Biggest Boys tier, you get your name read off at the end of every video. Zoth, Revo Pregame, Emily, Kyle Foley, Jennifer Jones, Caffeine Unicorn, Goblin of the Year, and Cameron Fordo. So if you want to hear your lovely name read off at the end of every video, be sure to join me on this specific tier. Thanks much, everyone, and I'll see you next time.